They laughed at her uniform before she even spoke. The tourists, dripping in designer watches and arrogance, called her dollar store Barbie. But Maya Coleman didn't flinch. Her hands shook as she balanced their plates, her pride swallowing the sting. 27 years old, still working double shifts in that small diner, still dreaming of finishing college. She had learned long ago that silence was cheaper than dignity. But today, silence would speak louder than any insult. Because as they mocked her accent, the door opened. An older man stepped inside, impeccable suit, silver cane, sharp eyes that missed nothing. The room turned to stare. He didn't say a word. "Lost old man," one tourist chuckled. Maya felt a spark in her chest. Pity? No. Recognition. She looked closer and saw the discreet hearing aid tucked behind his ear. Without hesitation, she lifted her hand and signed, "Good morning, sir. Table for one." And for the first time, the diner went silent. The man's expression changed. Surprise, then something deeper. He signed back, swiftly, elegantly. Not American Sign Language. German. Maya answered flawlessly. The tourists froze, speechless. How often do we mistake humility for weakness? If you believe respect should be universal, hit that subscribe button now and tell me where you're watching from. Because the story you're about to hear will remind you that real power doesn't need to raise its voice. Miss it, and there's a chance you'll never see us again. When the diner's door swung shut behind that mysterious old man, something in the air shifted. Even after the laughter faded, the silence he left behind clung to the walls. Maya Coleman stood behind the counter, her heart still beating to the rhythm of what had just happened, the brief exchange of hands and hearts through silent language. She didn't even know the man's name, yet the way he looked at her, the way he saw her when no one else did, had left her trembling. For the rest of the morning, she worked as if walking in two worlds, one filled with cheap coffee, greasy plates, and impatient voices, and another that felt vast, dignified, almost sacred, the world that opened every time her fingers spoke the language of silence. But whispers broke the spell. "She's flirting with that old geezer," one cook said, smirking. "Probably thinks he'll tip big." Another snickered, "Girl doesn't even know deaf folks don't pay much attention." They laughed, unaware that Maya had learned long ago to turn pain into quiet strength. She wiped the counter, her hands moving automatically, but her mind was elsewhere, back to her brother, Malik. He had been born deaf, full of mischief and laughter, and he'd taught her what real listening meant. He was gone now, taken by pneumonia 3 winters ago, but every time Maya signed, she felt him close. It wasn't charity, it was connection. She had promised him she'd never let the world forget that silence too. Has a voice. The bell above the door rang again. Rick, the manager, barked for someone to take table 6. But when Maya turned, her breath caught. The same man, Johann, stood there, calm and composed, holding a folded piece of paper. His blue eyes flickered toward her, then to the counter. No one recognized him. To them, he was just another customer. Maybe a tourist or a retired engineer. But to the world outside this small town, he was Johann Adler, founder of Adler Tech Energy Systems, one of Europe's most powerful renewable energy empires. His name carried weight in boardrooms from Berlin to Boston, though few ever saw him anymore. 5 years earlier, an explosion at a wind farm prototype site had taken the hearing from his world and the joy from his eyes. Since then, he'd lived in deliberate quiet, communicating through sign and writing, retreating from the noise of fame. Maya didn't know any of that yet. She just saw a man who needed understanding. She smiled and signed again. Welcome back. Coffee? Johann smiled faintly, nodding. His signs came slower now, gentler, as though testing whether she'd still understand. She did. Perfectly. Rick rolled his eyes. "You gonna chat all day? Or actually serve someone?" he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. The other waitresses giggled. Maya bit her lip, focused on the man before her, and kept signing. Johann's tablet vibrated. He typed something, turned it toward her. "You know German Sign Language?" "Where did you learn?" She signed. "My brother taught me. He was deaf. He passed away, but I promised to keep his language alive." He nodded slowly, his gaze softening. His fingers moved again. Few people keep promises to the silent. You must love deeply. Maya swallowed hard. No one had ever said something like that to her, especially not here, surrounded by cynicism. She wanted to ask who he was, but professionalism held her tongue. She simply replied, "Love is the only thing that listens without needing words." He smiled, an expression so genuine it startled her. Then he wrote another line on his tablet. "May I sit by the window? I like the light." As she guided him to the seat, a couple at the next table whispered, "Is that her sugar grandpa?" and laughed. Maya ignored them. The laughter burned, but she poured his coffee anyway. Steady hands, calm heart. She didn't notice the quiet camera flash from a young tourist by the door, capturing the image of a billionaire and a waitress mid-conversation. An image that would, in days to come, circle the globe. Johann studied the diner, the chipped tiles, the flickering neon sign, the staff pretending not to stare. He tapped something into his tablet. "You work here long?" She smiled wearily. 3 years. Nights, mostly. Daytime I go to school. Social work. To help people like your brother?" He signed. She nodded. "And anyone who feels unseen." For a moment he didn't respond. His fingers stilled mid-air. Then he typed, "Unseen is a word I know well." That line lingered between them. Maya didn't yet understand that this quiet man once stood on world stages beside presidents and kings, that the accident, which stole his hearing, had also exposed how few truly listened. Board members whispered about replacing him. Tabloids speculated about his decline. In silence, he had discovered how cruel noise could be. Now, across this chipped formica table, he saw in Maya what he'd been searching for, someone who spoke with empathy instead of ego. She refilled his cup, and he watched the careful way she poured, steady but respectful, not rushing as others did. "Girls wasting time," Rick muttered again. "That old guy's not even gonna tip." Maya pretended not to hear. Johann, though, saw the manager's sneer, read his lips easily, and something cold settled in his expression. He scribbled a note, tore it from his pad, and slid it beneath his plate before standing. He touched his heart in farewell, then pointed gently toward her name tag. His fingers shaped her name perfectly. Maya. She nodded, touched her chest, and signed back. "Nice to meet you." When he left, she found the note. It was written in elegant handwriting. "Your silence speaks louder than their noise. Keep it." That evening, as she counted her tips, barely enough for bus fare, she couldn't stop thinking about him. Who was he really? Why had his words felt like a promise? Days passed, and the diner returned to its usual rhythm of clattering plates and half-hearted apologies. Yet Johann Adler was never far from Maya's thoughts. She found herself practicing signs in the mirror again, remembering how effortlessly he had moved, the grace of his language. On the third night, as rain lashed the diner windows, Rick approached her with that same smirk. "Hey, sign girl," he said, tossing a paper toward her. "Guess your old boyfriend's famous. Some reporter called asking about you." She froze. "Reporter?" He shrugged. "Some tech company guy from Germany. Said the deaf man who came here owns half of Europe or something. You pull that off, you're set for life." Laughter erupted behind the counter, but Maya didn't join in. Her mind was racing. Johann Adler, she had heard that name once, on a documentary about clean energy, a man who'd built turbines that powered entire cities. Could it be the same person? She stayed up late, searching the internet on her old phone. There he was, photographs from years ago, before the accident. Same silver hair, same blue eyes. She read about the explosion that had damaged his hearing, the way he'd vanished from public life afterward. And then she saw a new article, dated only days earlier. Adler Tech CEO spotted in New York State. Locals unaware of his identity. Her hand covered her mouth. She whispered into the empty room, "That was him." But beneath the shock was something else. Sadness. Because now she realized what he'd been doing in that small diner. Seeking humanity, not attention. Every person who mocked him had failed a test they didn't know they were taking. Meanwhile, miles away, Johann sat alone in his penthouse overlooking the Hudson. The city glowed below, but he barely saw it. On his tablet, he replayed the diner's security footage sent by his assistant. There she was, the waitress who spoke to him without pity, who signed with honesty instead of performance. He zoomed in on her face. There was strength there, quiet, humble, radiant. He typed a message to his assistant. Find out her full name and send her a letter tomorrow. But then he paused, deleted it, and wrote instead, "No, I will return myself." For the first time in years, Johann Adler smiled without forcing it. The next morning, Maya was back behind the counter, tying her apron when the bell chimed. She looked up, and there he was again. Same cane, same suit, same steady calm. This time he placed a small leather notebook on the counter and wrote, "Coffee, please. 2 sugars." She prepared it quickly, setting it down with a shy smile. He pointed to the notebook. She hesitated, then opened it. The first page read, Adler Tech Energy Systems, Confidential Prototype Notes. Her eyes widened. "You're him," she whispered. He nodded once. Then, with deliberate signs, he said, "Sometimes I visit places where people forget titles. There, I see truth." Her throat tightened. He continued, "You treated me like a man, not a miracle. That is rare." Behind them, one of the waitresses snorted. "Look at her, acting like she's best friends with some old foreigner." Maya ignored it, but Johann's eyes narrowed. He typed again. "Does this happen often?" She sighed. "Every day. But it's fine. People don't know better." He wrote, "You shouldn't have to excuse ignorance." Then he slid the notebook toward her. Inside was another note. "If you ever wish to see what respect looks like, come to this address tomorrow at noon." A Manhattan address followed, embossed with the Adler Tech seal. She stared at it, unsure if it was real or some elaborate misunderstanding. But before she could ask, he placed $200 bills on the table, nodded, and left. Rick immediately swooped in. Holy hell, he did tip big. Knew it. He grabbed the cash, tucking it into his apron. "Rick, that's not yours," Maya said quietly. He smirked. "House policy. Manager handles big tips. You can keep your nickels." She wanted to argue, but exhaustion won. She tucked the note into her pocket and finished her shift in silence. That night, she couldn't sleep. The idea of showing up at that skyscraper terrified her. She imagined security guards laughing her out the door, executives staring down their noses. But something about Johann's calm confidence told her it wasn't a trick. By dawn, she made her decision. She'd go. When the first rays of sun slipped through her curtains, she pulled on her best blouse, the one she saved for job interviews, and took the bus to Manhattan. Her heart pounded the entire 3-hour ride. Every street sign looked foreign, every skyscraper intimidating. Finally, she stood before the golden letters. Adler Tech Global Headquarters. Inside, glass and marble gleamed like another world. The receptionist, polished and perfect, barely looked up. "Appointments only," she said. "I was invited by Mr. Adler," Maya replied, voice trembling. The receptionist smirked. "Mr. Adler doesn't invite waitresses." Maya turned to leave, humiliation rising again. But then the elevator doors opened. Johann stepped out, his cane clicking softly on the floor. The entire lobby froze. Executives straightened their ties. He raised a hand, signed a greeting to her, and smiled. "You came," his tablet announced aloud through its speaker. Tears filled her eyes. "Mr. Adler, you know her?" the receptionist stammered. He nodded. "She listens." In that moment, everyone realized this wasn't just some girl from a diner. She had passed a test of humanity most had failed. He gestured for her to follow, leading her toward the elevators. As the doors closed, she caught her reflection beside his. Two worlds, different in every way, yet bound by a language most people refuse to learn. Upstairs, the boardroom buzzed with tension. Executives whispered about new mergers, profits, losses. But when Johann entered with Maya beside him, silence fell. He signed rapidly to his interpreter, who announced, "This is Miss Maya Coleman. She reminds me what leadership means." Maya's knees nearly gave out. She wanted to disappear, yet his presence steadied her. He turned to her, signing privately, "You belong in every room where kindness is rare." She bit her lip, overwhelmed. For the next hour, Johann ignored the murmurs, focusing entirely on her. He asked about her studies, her dreams, her late brother. She told him everything, how Malik had wanted to be a teacher for deaf children, how she now studied social work to build the school he never could. When she finished, he typed, "Would you let me help?" She shook her head instinctively. "You've already helped. You saw me." His eyes glistened. No one had spoken to him like that since the accident. Not the doctors, not the investors, not even so-called friends. They spoke at him, never with him. But here was this young woman from a small diner who saw through the billions, through the titles, to the man who still longed to be understood. As they left the building together, flashes from cameras outside caught them again. Journalists had followed the story. One shouted, "Mr. Adler, who is she?" He typed quickly, held the tablet up so the screen spoke for him. "She is the only person in that diner who heard me." That quote would soon go viral. But inside Maya, a storm of humility and awe was brewing. How had a simple act of respect turned into this? That night, when she returned home, she replayed every moment, his words, his gestures, his unwavering calm. She realized that kindness had power far beyond what she'd imagined. It could bridge worlds, heal wounds, even reach the deaf corners of grief and arrogance alike. And though she didn't yet know it, her life had already shifted forever. Because Johann Adler had decided something that would change both their fates. The world's richest deaf man was about to make the quietest waitress the face of his greatest mission. So, let me ask you, would you still show kindness if no one was watching? If this story touched something deep in you, tap that subscribe button right now and drop a quick comment telling us where you're watching from. Don't miss the next chapter. Because the moment she steps into Adlertech again, the truth he reveals will leave even the loudest hearts speechless. The morning had started with quiet dignity. For a brief, fragile moment, Maya felt that maybe the world wasn't as cruel as it often seemed. The old man's kindness, his calm gaze, the way he spoke through his hands, it had reminded her that respect still existed somewhere beneath the noise of everyday life. She had smiled more that morning than she had all week. But life has a way of testing gentle souls, doesn't it? It waits until they feel safe before it shatters their peace again. The diner was filling up fast. The smell of burnt toast, bacon grease, and cheap coffee lingered in the air. Plates clattered, the register dinged, and laughter from a table of tourists cut through the morning hum. Maya stood by the counter, jotting down orders, still glancing at the man by the window, Johann Adler, though she didn't know that name yet. He sat quietly, stirring his coffee, his eyes distant but content. There was something in the stillness around him, a quiet authority that no one else seemed to notice. But Rick Torres noticed. Rick, the kind of man who believed power came from volume. His voice carried through the diner like a constant reminder that someone was always watching, always judging. "Maya," he barked from the kitchen doorway, "you planning to move or just stand there babysitting Grandpa?" She blinked, startled. "He's still drinking his coffee, sir." Rick scoffed loudly enough for the entire diner to hear. "He's been nursing that one cup for 20 minutes. We need that table for paying customers. This ain't a retirement home." A few customers chuckled. Someone muttered, "Guess she's running a charity now." Maya's cheeks flushed, but she stayed calm. "He hasn't finished, sir. I'll clear it when he leaves." Rick crossed his arms, lips curling into a smirk. "You think you're special because you know a few hand tricks? Let me make this clear. You're here to serve, not socialize." The words stung, not because of what he said, but because of how easily everyone accepted it. As if kindness was something foolish, something unprofitable. Johann looked up from his cup. His sharp blue eyes flicked between them. Slowly, deliberately, he picked up his tablet, typed something, and turned the screen toward Rick. The words appeared in large, bold letters. "Your staff's attitude speaks louder than words." The diner fell silent. You could hear the hum of the ceiling fan, the faint buzz of fluorescent lights. Rick's smirk faltered for a split second before returning. "Cute," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "Maybe next time, write a Yelp review." Johann didn't respond. He simply smiled. A faint, knowing smile that carried more power than any insult could. Then, reaching into his coat pocket, he pulled out a crisp $100 bill and placed it beneath his coffee cup. Without another glance, he stood, nodded once at Maya, and walked toward the door. His cane tapped softly against the tiled floor, a rhythmic sound that echoed long after he left. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Rick moved fast, snatching the bill from under the cup like a hawk catching prey. He held it up, smirking. "Well, well, looks like Grandpa knows how to tip after all." Maya's stomach turned. "That's not yours," she said quietly. Rick raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" "You didn't serve him. I did." The laughter started again, sharper this time. "Look at her," one of the other waitresses snorted. "Arguing over a tip like it's the lottery." Rick leaned closer, his voice dropping into a cruel whisper. "You'd still be making minimum wage if I hadn't hired you, Maya. Maybe remember who signs your paycheck before mouthing off." Her hands trembled, but she didn't look away. "You didn't hire me out of kindness," she said softly. "You hired me because no one else wanted the closing shift." He chuckled, stepping back. You've got an attitude for someone wearing a thrift store uniform. Tell you what, keep it up, and you'll be out of here before lunch." He tucked the bill into his pocket and turned away, humming a tune as if nothing had happened. Maya stood frozen, the weight of humiliation pressing against her chest. Around her, the diner returned to normal, the laughter, the chatter, the clinking plates. But something inside her had changed. She looked at the empty seat by the window, the half-finished coffee, and noticed something she hadn't before: a folded napkin, neatly tucked beneath the cup. Her breath caught. She glanced toward the door, but Johann was gone. Slowly, she reached for the napkin, her fingers trembling slightly. Written across it, in careful cursive, were a few words, in German. She couldn't read it, not yet. But something about the handwriting, the precision, told her it wasn't just a note. It was a message, a piece of the quiet mystery that surrounded that man. She slipped it into her pocket before Rick could notice. The rest of the day dragged on like wet sand. Every movement felt heavier. The laughter around her now sounded hollow, forced. Each insult Rick threw her way echoed louder than it should have. But under all that noise, that folded napkin burned in her mind like a secret flame. When her shift ended, she walked home in silence, the city lights stretching across puddles like ghosts of another world. The rain had started again, soft but steady, and the streets smelled of asphalt and longing. She clutched her coat tighter, the napkin safe in her pocket. Her apartment was small, barely more than a single room with a flickering light and a stack of textbooks beside her bed. She changed into an oversized sweater, poured herself a cup of tea, and finally unfolded the napkin. The letters were delicate, precise, old-fashioned handwriting that spoke of discipline and education. But the words were foreign. She recognized only one: Herz, heart. She opened her laptop, typed each word carefully into a translator, and watched as the meaning appeared on the screen. Her eyes widened. It said, "Your heart listens when others only hear." Never lose that. Her hand covered her mouth. For a long moment, she couldn't breathe. All the noise of the day, the laughter, the insults, Rick's smug voice, faded away. What remained was that sentence, burning bright and clear. It wasn't just a compliment. It was recognition. Because for years, Maya had felt invisible. Every night at that diner, she'd served hundreds of people who looked through her like glass. To them, she was a name tag, a tray, a shadow. But in those few minutes with Johann, she'd been seen. Not as a waitress, not as a woman struggling to pay tuition, but as a soul that still chose kindness, even when the world didn't deserve it. She sat there for a long time, staring at the words, her tea growing cold. She didn't know what it meant, not fully. But she knew one thing for certain: this man was no ordinary customer. There was something purposeful about every move he made, every word he wrote. Meanwhile, across the city, in a penthouse surrounded by glass and silence, Johann Adler sat by a window overlooking the skyline. His assistant stood nearby, listing meetings and reports, but Johann wasn't listening. He held a small folded napkin identical to the one Maya now read. On it, he had written another line, one meant for himself. "The truest wealth is found in those who listen." He smiled faintly, remembering the quiet strength in Maya's eyes. The next morning, Maya returned to work, pretending nothing had changed. But inside, everything had. Rick was in a foul mood, barking orders, slamming drawers. The staff whispered rumors. Apparently, he'd received a complaint from a mystery customer. Maya said nothing, but part of her knew. She wiped down the same table by the window, her movements careful, reverent almost. Beneath her fatigue, a spark of defiance stirred. Rick noticed. "You've been acting strange lately," he said, leaning against the counter. "That old man got in your head or something?" She looked up. "He reminded me that respect doesn't cost anything." Rick rolled his eyes. "Respect doesn't pay rent either." But as he turned away, she whispered, "Neither does cruelty." It was the first time she'd ever talked back, and though her hands trembled afterward, it felt like reclaiming a part of herself she hadn't realized was missing. For the next few hours, she threw herself into her work. Every coffee poured, every table cleaned, it all carried a new kind of pride. She wasn't working for Rick or the customers who barely noticed her. She was working for the promise she saw in that napkin, that her heart, her compassion, still mattered. That night, when she walked home under the same streetlights, she kept the napkin folded neatly inside her wallet. A reminder that sometimes the smallest moments carry the loudest echoes. She didn't know yet that her quiet act of patience had been watched, studied, and remembered by one of the most powerful men alive. She didn't know that Johann Adler was already making plans that would soon pull her out of obscurity and into the center of a storm she never saw coming. All she knew was that someone out there had noticed the kind of goodness the world often tramples. And somehow, that was enough to keep her going. Because deep down, Maya understood something most people forgot. Kindness isn't weakness. It's rebellion in a cruel world. So let me ask you, would you still show kindness if no one was watching? If this story moved something inside you, hit that subscribe button right now and let us know where you're watching from. You won't want to miss what happens next, because when Maya finally learns who that quiet stranger really was, her entire world will never be the same again. There are some nights that feel longer than time itself. Nights when silence isn't peace. It's a weight pressing against the chest. For Maya Coleman, that night was one of them. She sat by the faint glow of her bedside lamp, exhausted from another endless shift, her apron still on, the world's cruelty still ringing faintly in her ears. Her hands ached from carrying trays, her feet throbbed from hours of standing, yet her mind refused to rest. Because that folded napkin still lay on her nightstand, taunting her, whispering something she couldn't ignore. She had stared at it for hours before finally unfolding it. The handwriting was precise and elegant, each stroke deliberate, not rushed. German again. She whispered the words aloud, sounding them out phonetically, her voice small against the hum of her old refrigerator. When she typed them carefully into an online translator, the message appeared like a light breaking through fog. Your silence speaks louder than their noise. Visit Adler Industries HQ, New York, tomorrow, noon. For a long moment, she just stared at the screen, unable to move. Her pulse quickened. It didn't feel real. Why would a man like that, quiet, mysterious, and clearly wealthy, want to see her again? And why invite her to a place like Adler Industries? Her roommate, Jasmine, walked in brushing her hair, half asleep and unimpressed. "You're still awake? Girl, it's almost midnight." Maya hesitated, then handed her the napkin. "Read this." Jasmine squinted, frowned, then burst out laughing. "Adler Industries? You mean the company that builds half the solar grids in the world? Oh yeah, sure, and I'm the Queen of England." "I'm serious," Maya said softly. "Oh, come on," Jasmine replied, waving her hand. "It's probably some prank. You remember that guy last month who left you his business card that turned out to be a flyer for a pyramid scheme? Don't tell me you're falling for another weirdo." Maya didn't respond. Something deep inside told her this wasn't a joke. There had been something different about that man. The calmness in his eyes, the dignity in his silence. He didn't look like someone who played games. And besides, the handwriting, it had purpose. She folded the napkin again, tighter this time, like protecting a secret, and whispered more to herself than to Jasmine. "I have to go." Jasmine threw her hands up. "You're seriously gonna blow your savings chasing a message from some stranger?" "Maya, you can't afford another bus ticket, let alone New York City." But Maya didn't argue, because she knew she couldn't explain it. She wasn't chasing money or fantasy, she was chasing a feeling. For the first time in years, someone had seen her value when no one else had. And that kind of recognition? That was priceless. Sleep never came. When dawn finally pushed through the curtains, she was already dressed. Her only decent blouse, clean jeans, and a worn pair of shoes polished until they almost shone. She checked the napkin one last time, tucking it into her pocket like a talisman. The bus ride from her small town to Manhattan felt like crossing between two worlds. The further the bus went, the smaller her life felt behind her. The diner, Rick's insults, the smell of burnt coffee. Ahead lay towering skyscrapers and possibilities she didn't dare imagine. She watched the landscape change from open fields to concrete horizons, her reflection in the window flickering between past and future. 3 hours later, she stepped off at Port Authority with trembling legs. The city's energy hit her like a tidal wave. Honking taxis, hurried footsteps, the rush of voices in a dozen languages. For a moment, she felt invisible again, just one face in a sea of millions. But she straightened her back and kept walking. She followed the address on the napkin until she reached it. And there it was, a skyscraper that seemed to scrape the sky itself. The name Adler Industries gleamed in gold letters above revolving glass doors. Her breath caught. The building exuded silence and power, a cathedral of glass and steel built by hands that believed in innovation and discipline. She stood on the sidewalk, her reflection merging with the golden letters behind her, and whispered, "What am I doing here?" Inside, everything gleamed, the marble floors, the polished chrome, the sound of distant footsteps softened by money. A massive wall screen displayed the company's motto, "Energy that listens." Maya approached the reception desk. The woman sitting there looked immaculate, her hair perfectly slicked, her voice sharp and detached. "May I help you?" Maya tried to sound confident. I was invited here. By Mr. Adler." The receptionist blinked, unimpressed. "Mr. Adler doesn't take walk-ins." "It wasn't a walk-in," Maya insisted, holding up the napkin like proof of a miracle. "He asked me to come." The woman's lips curved in amusement. "On a napkin?" She leaned back in her chair, sighing. "Ma'am, this is a private corporate building. Please don't waste our time. Security can escort you out." Maya's throat tightened. She could feel every eye in the lobby turning toward her. Guards, assistants, passing executives. The humiliation from the diner returned, sharper this time. But she swallowed hard and nodded. "I understand." She turned toward the door, her vision blurring with unshed tears. The marble floor seemed to stretch endlessly. She had believed in something bigger. And maybe that was her mistake, thinking the world rewarded sincerity. Then, a sound. The soft click of an elevator door opening behind her. The atmosphere changed instantly, like the air itself had straightened its posture. The receptionist looked up, eyes widening. Whispers rippled across the room. Maya turned. Standing there, tall and dignified, was Johann Adler, the same man from the diner, the same man whose quiet strength had stopped a room full of laughter. His silver cane gleamed beneath the fluorescent lights, and beside him stood a young assistant holding a briefcase. Every conversation in the lobby died. You could feel the shift, the sudden awareness that someone important had just walked in. Johann's eyes found hers immediately. For a long, silent moment, they just looked at each other. Then, slowly, he lifted his hand and signed, "You came." The receptionist's face drained of color. Mr. Adler, she said. He raised a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. His expression was calm, but his eyes carried quiet authority. He signed again, this time to his assistant, who translated aloud. "She is my guest." A ripple of murmurs swept through the lobby. Maya's heart raced. The same man she'd defended, the same man she'd served coffee to, now stood in front of her as the head of one of the largest companies in the world. Johann gestured for her to follow. As they walked, the receptionist stammered out an apology Maya barely heard. She was still processing what was happening. How the same silence that once made her invisible now made the whole world pause. Inside the elevator, Johann tapped a message into his tablet and turned it toward her. "I'm glad you trusted the message." She signed softly. "I almost didn't. My friend thought it was a prank." He smiled faintly. "Most people stop believing when life laughs at them. You didn't." Her throat tightened. "Why me?" He hesitated, then wrote, "Because you listen, and I need people who listen." The elevator chimed. The doors opened into a world unlike anything Maya had ever seen. A vast floor of glass offices overlooking the city, filled with quiet hums of innovation. Scientists, designers, engineers, all moving with focus and respect. Yet the noise here wasn't loud. It was purposeful, almost melodic. As they walked, people turned to greet Johann with deference. Some nodded politely, others stepped aside, but everyone noticed the young woman walking beside him, unsure and wide-eyed. Johann led her into a private conference room. The skyline sprawling behind him like a painting. He motioned for her to sit. His assistant spoke gently. "Mr. Adler says he hopes your trip wasn't too hard." "It was worth it," Maya said quietly. Johann typed another message. "Do you know what this company stands for?" She shook her head. "We create energy that listens," he wrote. "Machines that adapt. Systems that hear the world instead of talking over it." But somewhere along the way, I realized technology isn't the only thing that's gone deaf. People have, too. He paused, studying her. "The diner showed me that." Her eyes widened. "You were testing me?" He shook his head. "No, I was searching." "For what?" She signed. "For someone who still hears the truth through the noise." Her heart pounded. She didn't know what to say, so she just nodded. He smiled gently. "You were kind when no one was watching." "That is rare, and now I need your help with something that requires exactly that." Maya stared at him. "My help? I don't even know why I'm here." Johann's assistant smiled knowingly. "You will soon." Outside, clouds drifted past the windows. The city below moved in rhythm, unaware that a single conversation was unfolding that could change both their lives. Johann leaned back, his tablet lighting up again. "The world measures success in volume," he typed. "But sometimes the quietest voices carry the most truth." He turned the screen toward her. "You reminded me of that." Maya felt a warmth spread through her chest, a mix of disbelief and gratitude. "I didn't do anything special," she said softly. He looked at her steadily. "Exactly. You just did what was right." For a long moment, The room was silent, except for the faint hum of city life beyond the glass. Then he stood, resting one hand on his cane. "Come back tomorrow. There's something I'd like to show you." Maya nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Okay." As he walked her back to the elevator, the employees they passed looked at her differently now, not as an intruder, but as someone important. The receptionist from earlier tried to apologize again, but Johann simply gave her a small, polite nod before continuing. When they reached the lobby, Maya turned to him. "Why did you really invite me?" He hesitated, then signed one word: faith. The elevator doors closed, leaving her alone with that word echoing in her chest. Outside, the city felt different, bigger, yet somehow more welcoming. The gold letters above the entrance shimmered in the afternoon light. Adler Industries. As she walked down the busy Manhattan street, she couldn't stop smiling. For the first time she felt seen, not because she fought for it, but because she had stayed true to who she was. That night, when she returned home, Jasmine was waiting, arms crossed. "So, how'd your big fairy tale go?" Maya smiled faintly, pulling the napkin from her pocket and setting it gently on the table. "It wasn't a fairy tale," she said. "It was an invitation to believe again." She didn't explain further. Some things didn't need explaining. Some things you just had to feel. And as she lay in bed that night, the city's lights flickering through her window, she whispered a quiet promise to herself. No matter what came next, she would never let the world silence her compassion again. Because sometimes the loudest act of courage is simply to keep listening when everyone else has stopped. So I'll ask you, have you ever been told you don't belong, only to prove that you did all along? If you've ever felt that, hit that subscribe button right now and tell me where you're watching from, because the next part of this story will show exactly what happens when the world finally realizes the power of someone who refused to stop believing. Sometimes destiny doesn't knock. It signs. It speaks in a language most of the world refuses to learn, a language that can only be understood by hearts that know how to listen. Maya Coleman stood in a glass room high above New York City, surrounded by people whose names moved markets. Yet all she could hear was the sound of her own heartbeat echoing in her chest. The city stretched endlessly below, rivers of cars, oceans of people. But up here, the air felt still. The boardroom at Adler Tech was unlike anything she had ever seen. Polished wood, chrome finishes, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the skyline like a painting. But what caught her attention wasn't the beauty of the place. It was the tension. Around the long oval table sat a handful of powerful men and women, their tailored suits stiff, their expressions carefully neutral. But behind those expressions, she felt something else: skepticism, whispers, judgment. At the head of the table, Johann Adler stood quietly, leaning slightly on his silver cane. The weight of his presence alone commanded silence. His eyes, sharp and pale blue, studied Maya with warmth, while the others looked at her like an anomaly. She was out of place, and they made sure she felt it. No one said it aloud, but it was clear what they were thinking. What is she doing here? Then came the sound of an impatient sigh. It belonged to Carl Brenner, the company's chief operating officer, a man with sharp features, slicked back hair, and a smirk that never seemed to leave his face. His watch gleamed as he crossed his arms, glancing between Johann and Maya with thinly veiled disdain. Carl had been waiting for this moment, not to see a test, but to see Johann fail. The board had been whispering that Adler Tech's visionary leader had lost his edge, that the old man's accident had left him unfit to lead. And now, seeing him bring a diner waitress into this sacred corporate chamber felt like confirmation of their fears. But Johann wasn't paying attention to Karl's arrogance. He turned toward Maya and began to sign, his movements fluid, graceful, deliberate. His assistant stood beside him, translating aloud. "Mr. Adler would like to ask you a few things, Maya. Please, answer freely." She nodded, her fingers already twitching nervously as if preparing to speak through her hands. Johann signed again. "Tell me about your family." Maya took a deep breath. Her voice trembled slightly as she answered, speaking and signing at once. "I grew up with one brother, Malik. He was deaf from birth. He taught me sign language when I was 8. He used to say words were like birds. You can't cage them just because you can't hear them sing." She smiled faintly. Then her eyes dimmed. "He passed away a few years ago. Pneumonia. I promised him I'd keep his language alive, that I'd make sure deaf children never felt like outsiders the way he did." The room was silent, but not kindly. One of the executives scribbled notes without looking up. Another glanced at Karl, who rolled his eyes. Johann nodded thoughtfully and signed again. "And your education?" "I'm studying social work at night school," she said. "It's hard, juggling classes and shifts, but I'll finish. I have to. I'm saving to open a school for deaf children someday, a place where they'll be seen, not just tolerated." Karl let out a quiet, sarcastic chuckle. "A school for deaf kids, huh? That's touching." Maya looked at him, startled by the tone. Karl leaned forward, voice smooth but sharp. "Sir," he said, turning to Johann, "she's a waitress. With all due respect, we're running an international energy company, not a charity foundation." "You're wasting time." Several executives shifted uncomfortably, pretending not to agree while secretly nodding in silence. Johann turned his gaze on Karl, his expression unreadable. He didn't sign right away. The silence stretched until Karl's smirk began to falter. Then Johann raised his hands and signed with slow precision. His assistant hesitated, reading carefully before translating. "Mr. Adler says, the difference between vision and ignorance is that one listens." The words hung in the air like thunder. Karl's jaw tightened. A few of the younger executives exchanged glances. Maya's chest swelled with quiet gratitude. She didn't need to say anything. Johann had said it all for her. He turned back to her, and his eyes softened again. Then he signed another sentence, and this time the assistant's voice carried something gentle. Almost curious. "Would you help me test something?" Maya blinked. "Me?" Johann nodded. She hesitated, unsure. "Of course. What is it?" He gestured to a sleek black tablet resting on the table. It looked simple, thin, polished, almost ordinary, but there was an aura of anticipation around it. The engineers in the room straightened subtly, their eyes fixed on it. The assistant stepped forward. "This," he explained, "is Adler Tech's newest prototype, a real-time communication interface that translates between spoken language and sign language instantly. It's still in testing. No one outside the company has ever tried it." Maya's breath caught. "You want me to use it?" Johann nodded again. His fingers moved quickly, the signs filled with excitement. The assistant translated, "You will be the first. It is designed to give the deaf a full voice, to remove every barrier between silence and understanding." Maya stared at the device, her fingers trembling slightly. The weight of the moment pressed down on her. Not fear, but awe. All her life, she had translated for others. She had been the bridge between silence and sound. And now, somehow, This man was asking her to test something that could change everything. She placed her hands on the edge of the table. "Okay," she whispered. Johann activated the device. The screen lit up, displaying two halves, one for text, one for hand movement recognition. Tiny sensors glowed faintly blue. He raised his hands and signed a simple greeting. "How are you today?" Instantly, the device spoke in a calm, digital voice. "How are you today?" The executives sat forward. The assistant's mouth fell open. Maya's eyes widened. She replied with her hands, slowly, deliberately. "I'm nervous, but grateful." The tablet repeated her words in clear speech. "I'm nervous, but grateful." Gasps filled the room. One of the engineers covered his mouth, whispering, "It works. It actually works." Johann's expression didn't change, but his eyes shimmered with emotion. He signed another sentence, longer this time. The voice followed instantly. "Do you believe communication is the key to peace?" Maya smiled, tears threatening to spill. She signed back, "Yes, because when people stop listening, they start hurting each other." Her answer came through the device's voice, smooth and confident, echoing through the glass chamber. For a brief, breathtaking moment, the world felt perfectly in sync. Language, empathy, technology, and humanity woven together in real time. Then the room erupted in applause. Even those who had doubted couldn't hide their amazement. The engineers clapped. Some executives rose to their feet. Only Carl remained seated, arms crossed tightly, lips pressed into a thin line. Maya looked around, overwhelmed. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, but this wasn't the kind of attention that humiliated. It was the kind that affirmed. Johann tapped the device once more, then signed to her. "You gave it life." She shook her head, smiling through tears. "No, sir. You gave it purpose." He typed something quickly into his tablet, then turned the screen toward the room. The message read, "This device will be the start of our next chapter. It will connect the unheard with the world that forgot to listen. Miss Coleman reminded me why we built it." The assistant read it aloud. And the applause rose again, louder this time. Maya pressed a trembling hand to her chest, unable to hold back the tears now. Carl, unable to contain himself any longer, scoffed loudly. "A waitress and a machine. That's the future of Adlertech now?" The room went quiet again. Johann slowly turned to him, his gaze cold and measured. He signed with deliberate grace, each movement sharp as a blade. The assistant's voice trembled slightly as it translated, "Mr. Adler says, greatness does not ask for permission. It only needs courage to begin." Carl looked away, his face flushed. Maya wanted to disappear and stand taller all at once. She had spent years being talked over, ignored, reduced to silence. And now, here she was, her words, her hands, her story, filling a boardroom full of people who had never imagined they could learn something from a woman like her. Johann placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, the kind of gesture that said more than any word could. He signed, "This is only the beginning." Her voice broke as she whispered, "Thank you for believing in me." He smiled. "No," he signed. "Thank you for reminding me to believe in humanity again." Outside, the city continued to hum, unaware that somewhere high above, in a quiet room of glass and steel, the world had just taken a step closer to understanding itself. As they left the boardroom, Maya caught her reflection in the mirror of the elevator doors, eyes red from tears, hands still trembling, but her posture different, stronger. For the first time in her life, she felt like she belonged. Back in the conference room, Carl remained seated, staring at the device on the table. His smirk was gone, replaced by something else. Envy. He had built his career climbing over people, believing power came from silencing others. Yet today, he had seen a waitress change the future by doing the opposite, by listening. Maya didn't know that his bitterness would soon turn into something darker, something that would test not only her faith, but Johann's legacy itself. But for now, she left Adlertech with her heart full and her spirit on fire. That evening, she returned home to her small apartment, clutching the napkin that had started it all. She unfolded it again, tracing the words. "Your silence speaks louder than their noise." This time, she understood. Her silence had never been weakness. It had been strength, the kind that doesn't need permission, doesn't seek approval. The kind that changes the world quietly, one act of empathy at a time. She looked out the window at the city lights and whispered, "Alec, I did it. They heard me." And though the wind carried her words away, somewhere deep inside, she knew her brother would have smiled. So let me ask you, if a single act of kindness can open doors that were never meant for you, would you still choose to stay silent? If innovation and compassion like this give you hope, subscribe right now and tell me where you're watching from. Because the next part of this story will prove that sometimes the quietest people start the loudest revolutions. They say the higher you rise, the louder the whispers become. For Johann Adler, those whispers were about to turn into knives. And for Maya Coleman, the girl who had spoken to a billionaire with nothing but grace and sincerity, those knives would soon cut her too. The morning after the test, the world was already shifting. Johann's groundbreaking communication tablet was a miracle of empathy and technology combined. But miracles always make enemies, especially among those who profit from misunderstanding. At first, Maya had no idea what storm was forming behind her. She went to work at the diner that morning with a quiet glow in her chest, still replaying the day before in her mind. The device speaking her signs aloud. The applause, the warmth in Johann's eyes when he told her, "You gave it life." For once, she'd gone home believing she mattered, believing kindness could really rewrite destiny. But as she tied her apron and picked up her notepad, the room felt different. Heads turned. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Rick Torres, the manager, stood by the register with a newspaper in his hand, folded open to a page that showed a photo of her, standing beside Johann Adler in the Adlertech boardroom. The headline was cruel. Deaf billionaire's strange obsession. Waitress turned protégé. Her stomach dropped. The article's first line hit even harder. Sources inside Adlertech claim CEO Johann Adler has grown erratic, entrusting company prototypes to a small-town waitress with no credentials. She could barely breathe. Rick's smirk was venomous. "You didn't tell me you were famous, Maya." I didn't know," she stammered. "I didn't tell anyone." "Oh, sure you didn't," he interrupted. "And yet, somehow, the whole country's reading about you." The other waitresses giggled in the corner. "So, you're dating him or what?" one asked. "Or does he just like his coffee served with extra attention?" Maya's hands shook. "It's not like that." Rick tossed the newspaper onto the counter. "You brought us attention, all right. Negative attention. We got reporters calling the diner this morning. They want interviews, photos, asking if our celebrity waitress is here." He stepped closer, his tone turning sharp. "I can't have this. You're a distraction, Maya. You're fired." The words hit harder than she expected. Fired for being kind. Fired for treating someone with respect. Her throat burned. "I didn't ask for any of this," she whispered. Rick shrugged. "Tell that to the cameras. Now get your stuff." She walked out without a word, tears blurring her vision as the bell above the door jingled one last time behind her. Outside, the wind was cold, but not as cold as the stares of strangers passing by. Someone across the street pointed, whispering to another. She didn't need to hear the words. She could see them in their eyes. Curiosity mixed with contempt. She took out her phone, scrolling through headlines. Is Johann Adler losing control? Billionaire's new muse, the waitress who stole the CEO's focus. Adler tech investors fear erratic leadership. Every article twisted the story further, turning kindness into scandal, empathy into weakness. She dialed Johann's number. No answer. She tried his assistant, straight to voicemail. She emailed. Nothing. The silence felt heavier than anything she'd ever known. She didn't know that miles away, in the towering Adler Tech headquarters, another war was being fought in rooms far above her reach. Carl Brenner stood before a semicircle of shareholders, his voice calm but cutting. "Gentlemen, we have a problem. Mr. Adler's emotional state has become a liability. He's trusting strangers. He's involving unqualified outsiders in company projects. This waitress, this woman, has already leaked photos to the press." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Carl smiled inwardly. It wasn't the truth that mattered. It was the narrative. And he knew how to spin one perfectly. One shareholder frowned. "But the device works, doesn't it? It's revolutionary." Carl's smile thinned. "It works, yes. But at what cost? Our reputation? Investors are nervous. The board is questioning whether Johann Adler still has the judgment to lead this company." He let the next sentence hang like poison in the air. "Perhaps it's time for new leadership." By evening, the story had spread globally. Financial analysts debated it on television. A well-known news anchor smirked as she read the headlines. Billionaire Johann Adler, famous for his philanthropic work, is now facing backlash for what some are calling an emotional breakdown. Sources claim he's become infatuated with a waitress from upstate New York, bringing her into private company meetings and allowing her to test multi-million-dollar prototypes. One executive called it embarrassing and said it's proof that Adler has lost his mind. A billionaire letting a waitress speak for him? Maybe she'll be CEO next. Laughter filled the studio. Maya sat in her tiny apartment, watching the broadcast with shaking hands. Her heart ached, not just for herself, but for Johann. He had trusted her, believed in her, and now the world was mocking him because of it. She turned off the TV, the screen going dark. The silence that followed was suffocating. She whispered to herself, "Why is kindness mocked until it succeeds?" She thought about all the times she'd seen it happen, how people ridiculed compassion until it became profitable, how they belittled empathy until it was celebrated in headlines. The world loved kindness as long as it came from someone powerful. When it came from people like her, it was called weakness. She tried to reach Johann again. Still nothing. For the first time, she wondered if he was avoiding her, not because he didn't care, but because he couldn't protect her. Meanwhile, Johann sat alone in his penthouse, the city glittering beneath him. On his desk lay newspapers, each headline ablaze. The tablet prototype sat beside them, silent but glowing faintly. The invention that was supposed to unite voices, now dividing his world in two. His assistant, nervous and loyal, typed on a separate tablet. "Sir, The board meeting tomorrow. They plan to vote. Johann nodded slowly. He had expected this. Carl's ambition had been clear for years. He just hadn't realized how far it would go. But what hurt most wasn't the betrayal of the board. It was knowing Maya was paying the price for his faith in her. He typed back, "Protect her. Whatever happens, keep her name out of the next storm." But it was too late. The storm had already consumed her. The following morning, Maya woke to knocks on her door. When she opened it, 2 reporters stood there, microphones ready. "Miss Coleman, are you Johann Adler's assistant? How did you meet him? Did he offer you money? Are you romantically involved?" She slammed the door, heart pounding. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her phone again. Johann's number. She hesitated, then typed a single message. "I never wanted any of this. I just wanted to help." No reply. The days passed, and her world seemed to shrink. She couldn't go back to the diner, couldn't walk down the street without whispers following her. Her bank account was nearly empty. She considered selling the napkin. Reporters would pay. But something inside her refused. That napkin wasn't a headline. It was hope. And yet, even hope felt fragile now. Across the ocean, in Germany, financial networks buzzed with news. Adler Tech shares down 17% amid leadership concerns. Investors demanded action. The boardroom in New York filled with angry voices as Carl stood at the head of the table, pretending to sound concerned. "It gives me no pleasure to say this," he lied, "but Mr. Adler's decisions have endangered the company. He's become unpredictable. Our duty is to protect shareholders, not indulge sentimentality." One board member asked, "And your solution?" Carl folded his hands. "Temporary removal. Let me take over until stability returns." At that moment, Johann entered quietly. His cane tapped the floor once, silencing the room. He signed calmly, his assistant translating. "You speak of stability, yet you build your power on chaos." Carl didn't flinch. "With all due respect, sir, your leadership is under review. The board will vote in 1 hour." Johann's expression didn't change, but the light in his eyes dimmed slightly. He nodded, knowing what this was. Power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers behind closed doors. Later that night, Maya scrolled through the endless feed of commentary online. The cruelty was astonishing. Maybe she used him for fame. She's probably lying about knowing sign language. Waitresses shouldn't play scientist. She closed her phone, tears streaking down her cheeks. How quickly admiration had turned to mockery. She wondered if Johann felt the same way. Betrayed by a world that claimed to love progress, but only on its own terms. And somewhere deep inside, she promised herself, if she ever saw him again, she would tell him that his faith hadn't been misplaced. Because even if the world called her foolish, she knew that what they'd shared, the connection, the humanity, was real. Back at Adler Tech, the vote was cast. The board suspended Johann's leadership pending review. Carl Brenner would serve as acting CEO. The headlines the next morning were merciless. Adler removed amid scandal. From genius to reckless. The fall of a visionary. Deaf billionaire's obsession costs him his company. And at the bottom of one article, a single photo. Johann leaving the building, cane in hand, expression unreadable. The caption read, "Silence can't save him now." But they were wrong. Silence would save him. Because Johann Adler's greatest weapon had never been his voice. It was his patience. He had built empires from silence before, and he would rebuild this one too. He looked at his reflection in the elevator mirror that day, his heart heavy but resolute. power built on ego collapses easily. But power built on truth always finds its way back. And though the world laughed now, he knew it wouldn't laugh for long. Because kindness, no matter how mocked or misunderstood, always outlasts cruelty. So I'll ask you, why is kindness mocked until it succeeds? If this story still makes you believe in the quiet strength of good people, hit that subscribe button right now and tell me where you're watching from. Because the next chapter will show you what happens when truth refuses to stay silent. Sometimes redemption doesn't come with applause. Sometimes it walks quietly through the door, disguised as the same pain that once broke you. For Maya Coleman, that moment was about to arrive. Not as a whisper this time, but as a roar that would echo across the world. It had been 6 sleepless days since everything fell apart. 6 days since the world mocked Johann Adler, since reporters camped outside her apartment, since the headlines made her kindness sound like madness. She had stopped turning on the TV. The laughter of talk show hosts, the venom of tabloids, it all blurred together into the same cruel noise. She had lost her job, her peace, and her anonymity. But she refused to lose her faith in the man who had once told her that silence could be power. Then, one morning, a letter arrived. Not an email, not a call, a letter. Thick paper embossed with gold. The seal read, Adler Tech Global Summit. Invitation. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. It read simply, Maya, the world spoke before it listened. Come tomorrow, noon, Adler Tech headquarters. It was signed, Johann Adler. She almost didn't go. Every logical part of her said it could be another setup, another headline waiting to humiliate her. But something in her heart, that quiet, stubborn whisper that had guided her all her life, said go. The next day, she stood outside the Adler Tech building once again. Cameras were everywhere, journalists buzzing like flies around glass. She pulled her coat tighter, her pulse racing as she made her way inside. No one stopped her this time. A security guard even nodded as she passed, as if someone had instructed them to treat her with respect. She followed the sound of murmuring voices until she reached the auditorium. It was massive, a sea of seats filled with reporters, executives, and international delegates. Banners hung from the ceiling. Adler Tech Global Summit. Innovation for Humanity. She found a seat near the back, trying to disappear into the crowd. Then the lights dimmed. A hush fell, the stage illuminated with a single spotlight, and Johann Adler stepped forward. The audience erupted in applause. Cameras flashed. But Maya noticed something. He wasn't walking with his usual hesitation. He seemed steadier, taller, as if carrying a renewed purpose. He raised a hand, and the room quieted instantly. Then, slowly, he began to sign. The giant screen behind him came to life, displaying his signs translated in real time into spoken words. The voice projected through the speakers was deep, clear, steady, not digital, but warm, human. It carried emotion. The crowd leaned forward, captivated. Johann's signs continued, and the voice echoed. For months, I've been silent while the world spoke for me. It called me lost, confused, incapable. But today, I speak in the only language that truly matters, the language of respect. A murmur rippled through the room. Cameras zoomed in. I was never broken, the voice continued. I was listening, and in that silence, I found what many of us lose when we gain power. Humility. He paused, his eyes sweeping across the audience. This woman, he pointed toward the crowd, reminded me of that language. Maya froze. He was looking straight at her. The spotlight turned, following his hand, bathing her in sudden brightness. Gasps spread through the room as screens displayed her face. She wanted to sink into her seat, but Johann's gaze steadied her. She didn't see a billionaire. She saw a man. She didn't treat me like a project. She treated me like a person. And because of her, we discovered the missing piece in every conversation humanity has ever failed to finish: understanding. The crowd listened in rapt silence. Every word translated perfectly, every sign graceful and deliberate. The world mocked kindness as weakness, he continued, but kindness built this company. Empathy fuels every invention we've ever made. And today, I stand before you not to defend myself, but to announce something that belongs to all of us. Behind him, the screen shifted to a logo. Project Echo, Bridging Voices. For years, we have been building a platform that merges human connection with artificial intelligence. A system capable of translating every sign, every movement, every silent word into speech, and every spoken word into sign. A world where no voice is left unheard. The audience erupted into applause. Johann smiled faintly, but raised a hand again. But no technology, no machine, can replace the humanity required to make it work. It is not the device that connects us. It is the intention behind it. He paused, and for a moment, his expression softened. So, today, I would like to name someone who represents that intention. Someone who saw through the noise when the rest of the world laughed. He gestured again, and the lights followed his hand, straight to Maya. Maya Coleman will serve as the first global ambassador for Project Echo. The room exploded. Reporters shouted. Cameras flashed so bright it felt like daylight. The sound was deafening. Applause, gasps, murmurs, disbelief. Carl Brenner, seated in the front row, went pale. He shot to his feet. "You can't be serious," he barked. "You're naming her? After everything she's done? After the headlines?" Johann turned slowly toward him. His expression was calm, but his eyes were cold steel. He began to sign again. The tablet's voice echoed loud and clear across the hall. The headlines were written by people who do not listen. I do. And what I heard in her silence was worth more than all their noise combined. The crowd erupted in cheers. Carl's face drained of color completely. He sank back into his seat, defeated, as every camera turned away from him and toward Maya. Her heart pounded so hard she could barely breathe. Her vision blurred with tears. She tried to stand, but her legs trembled. Still, she made her way toward the stage, her steps uncertain but steady. When she reached Johann, he nodded, pride shining in his eyes. He signed to her softly. "It's your turn now." The room fell silent. The tablet was still on. Maya looked at the crowd, hundreds of faces, cameras, lights, and then at Johann, who nodded once, reassuringly. Her hands began to move. "I never imagined my hands could speak to this many people," she signed, the tablet translating every motion into warm, human speech. "All my life, I thought being quiet made me invisible. I was wrong. Sometimes silence is just waiting for the right moment to be heard." A hush spread over the crowd. I worked in a diner where people mocked me for caring. I served strangers who thought kindness was something to laugh at. But the truth is, every small act of respect, every gentle word, every moment of empathy, they matter. They always matter. Her voice trembled through the speakers. Cameras zoomed in as tears glistened on her cheeks. I met a man who the world said had lost his voice. But he never lost it. The world just stopped listening. He reminded me that silence isn't weakness. It's wisdom, waiting to be shared. She turned toward Johann, her eyes full of gratitude. He believed that technology could bring people closer. But what he really built was something far greater. A bridge between hearts. She looked back at the crowd, her voice steady now. Every voice deserves to be heard, even those spoken with hands. The room erupted in applause. People stood, clapping, cheering, crying. Reporters wiped their eyes. Executives who had once doubted her now looked at her with awe. Even Carl could not look up. Johann reached out, placing a gentle hand over hers, signing a single word. Proud. She smiled through tears. This, Johann's translated voice said, is not just a victory for technology. It's a victory for understanding. Let the world know. Empathy is the new innovation. The audience rose again, a standing ovation that went on for minutes. Cameras broadcast the moment across continents. Social media exploded. The hashtags flooded in. Project Echo. See every voice matters. Chandris Adler returns. That day, the narrative shifted. The same networks that had mocked them now replayed the speech on a loop, calling it the most powerful message of unity in years. Maya's phone buzzed with messages from strangers around the world. Deaf children sending her video messages, parents thanking her, teachers saying their students watched the summit and cried. But what moved her most was a message from an unknown number that simply read, "Your brother would be proud." She didn't know who sent it, but she felt it deep in her soul. In the following hours, news outlets called it a redemption arc, an empire reborn, a revolution of compassion. But to Maya, it wasn't about redemption or revolution. It was about remembering what she had almost forgotten, that even in a world that mocks gentleness, it's still possible to change everything with one act of humanity. That night, as the lights dimmed and the crowd dispersed, she stood beside Johann at the edge of the stage. He looked out over the empty seats, the echoes of applause still faint in the air. She signed quietly, "You did it." He shook his head, smiling. "We did it." Maya looked down at her hands, the same hands that once carried plates and coffee cups, now carrying something greater. Not fame, not fortune, but purpose. For the first time, she realized what the napkin message had truly meant. Your silence speaks louder than their noise. And now, the world was finally listening. So, tell me, have you ever been underestimated, only to prove you were more than anyone believed? If this moment moved you, tap the heart and share this story with someone who believes in second chances. Because the next chapter will remind you that the loudest revolutions often begin with the quietest souls. They say truth moves slowly, but when it finally arrives, it shakes everything that tried to bury it. For Johann Adler and Maya Coleman, the truth was no longer a whisper in the dark. It was thunder rolling across the world, demanding to be heard. In the days following the global summit, the world couldn't stop talking. Clips of Johann's signing, Maya's trembling voice, and the phrase, "Every voice deserves to be heard," even those spoken with hands, had gone viral. It was on every platform, translated into 20 languages, replayed in schools, churches, and offices. But not everyone was clapping. Some people were hiding. In the boardroom of Adler Tech, Carl Brenner sat in a storm of his own making. The walls that once echoed with his smug confidence were now filled with the low hum of fear. The investigation had begun, and the evidence was undeniable. Emails, leaked documents, secret calls to reporters. The board members who had once applauded him now avoided his gaze. One of them finally broke the silence. "Carl, they found everything. The emails you sent to Global Business Weekly, the fabricated quotes, the payments to journalists to smear Maya's name. It's all there." Carl's jaw tightened. "This is a misunderstanding," he muttered. But there was no misunderstanding. His lies had become the noose tightening around his career. And now, there was no one left to save him. The door opened. Johann entered, cane tapping lightly against the marble floor. He moved slowly, but the weight of his silence filled the room with more authority than any shouting could. Everyone stood. Everyone, except Carl. Johann didn't need to raise his hands yet. The giant screen behind him lit up automatically, displaying a single line of text he had typed earlier. "A company built on lies cannot hear the truth." The words appeared in silence, and yet they struck harder than any speech. Carl scoffed. "You think a sentimental performance at a summit makes you invincible? You embarrassed this company, dragged us through pity and emotion. You think naming a waitress as ambassador makes you a hero? You're a fool, Johann." Johann's expression didn't change. He began to sign calmly, his movements precise. His assistant translated every word. "What makes a fool, Mr. Brenner, is believing kindness has no power. You built your reputation on noise, rumors, manipulation, and greed. But noise fades. Integrity doesn't." Carl tried to laugh, but the sound came out strained. "You're not going to fire me. The shareholders need me." Johann paused, then typed on his tablet. The words appeared on the big screen again. The shareholders needed truth more. The board members looked at one another. The oldest among them nodded solemnly. "Mr. Brenner," he said, "your tenure with Adler Tech is terminated effective immediately." Carl stood abruptly, his chair screeching across the floor. "You'll regret this," he snapped. "When the next quarter fails, when profits drop, you'll all come crawling back." Johann watched him leave without a word. The door closed behind Carl like the ending of a chapter long overdue. When silence returned, Johann turned to the board and signed again. "Reputation is not restored through revenge. It is restored through action." Adler Tech will now dedicate 20% of its annual profit to Project Echo, ensuring that every school, hospital, and government institution has access to real-time communication technology for the deaf and hard-of-hearing community. The room erupted in quiet applause. Even those who once doubted him stood and nodded with respect. The old man they had dismissed as broken had just reminded them all what true leadership looked like. That same afternoon, the announcement went public. News anchors around the world repeated the headline: "Adler Tech restores integrity. Project Echo becomes global initiative." And while Johann's name soared again, another story quietly rose beside his: Maya Coleman. Her photo, once mocked, once plastered beneath cruel headlines, now appeared beside words of praise. The waitress who taught a billionaire how to listen. Emails flooded her inbox from universities, organizations, and deaf advocacy groups. Letters from children learning to sign for the first time. Messages from parents thanking her for helping their kids feel seen. And then came the letter from Johann himself. It was short, typed on Adler Tech letterhead, sealed with the company's golden emblem. "Maya, as of today, you are officially part of Adler Tech's Global Communications Division. Your starting salary, $120,000 annually. In addition, the Adler Foundation will fully fund your education until you complete your degree and open your school. This isn't charity. It's recognition." The world needs more listeners like you. She sat at her kitchen table, the letter trembling in her hands. For a long time she didn't move. The tears came slowly, quietly. Then, all at once, Jasmine, her roommate, peeked over her shoulder. "Girl," she whispered, "you're rich." Maya laughed through tears. "No," she said softly, "I'm free." Within hours, the story spread again. But this time, it wasn't scandal. It was celebration. Headlines across the internet praised her courage. TV anchors spoke her name with admiration. Even the same news anchor who had once mocked Johan's waitress obsession went live again that evening. Her tone sheepish and contrite. "In a rare act of public humility, we want to correct our previous coverage," she said. Johan Adler's collaboration with Maya Coleman wasn't eccentric. It was visionary. Project Echo is already being called one of the greatest humanitarian innovations of our time. The world had changed its tune, but the part that brought Maya to her knees came the next morning. The diner, the one that had mocked her, the one that had fired her, was now drowning in bad press. Customers had stopped coming. Their online reviews were flooded with angry comments. "Fired a woman for being kind. Never eating there again." This diner disrespected the ambassador of Project Echo. Shameful. Rick Torres, the same manager who once sneered at her, now stood in front of a local news camera, sweating under the bright lights. "I just want to publicly apologize," he said, voice cracking. "To Maya Coleman, if you're watching, I was wrong. I let my pride get in the way of decency. You didn't deserve the way I treated you." Maya watched it online later that night, her expression unreadable. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just whispered, "I forgive you." Because that's who she was. Meanwhile, Johan was preparing for his first official press conference since regaining control of Adler Tech. The room was packed with reporters, cameras, and bright lights. But this time, he didn't stand alone. Maya sat beside him, calm but nervous, her hands folded neatly in her lap. When the questions began, they all circled the same theme. Why her? Why, of all people, did one of the richest, most powerful men on earth choose a waitress to represent his company's new global initiative? Johan listened patiently to every version of the same question. Then, without a word, he picked up his tablet. His fingers moved slowly, deliberately. The screen behind him came to life. The room fell silent as the words appeared. Because she listened, even when no one else did. A hush blanketed the hall. The sentence lingered in the air, simple yet devastatingly profound. Cameras clicked. Pens stopped moving. Reporters lowered their microphones as if realizing they'd just witnessed something timeless. Maya looked at him, tears brimming again. He met her gaze and signed softly. This is only the beginning. From that moment forward, everything changed. Project Echo became more than technology. It became a movement. Universities adopted it in classrooms. Hospitals used it for patient communication. Governments ordered it for public services. Even small community centers across the world installed the devices, calling them Maya screens. Her face, once hidden behind a diner counter, was now on the covers of magazines: Time, Forbes, Humanity Weekly. The headlines read, "The Listener Who Changed the World." And through it all, Maya never forgot where she came from. She still took the bus to work sometimes, still waved to the barista who recognized her. Fame hadn't rewritten her. It had simply amplified who she already was. At the official launch of her scholarship program, Maya stood on a stage much smaller than the global summits, but more meaningful to her. Before her sat 20 deaf children, signing eagerly to one another. their faces bright with excitement. She spoke slowly, her voice soft, but sure. "I used to think dreams were things you had to chase," she said. "Now I know. Sometimes they find you, disguised as the people you least expect." Johann sat in the front row, watching proudly. When she finished, he stood and signed for everyone to see. "Thank you for reminding the world how to listen." She signed back, "Thank you for giving it a reason to." The applause was thunderous. Later that evening, as the sun set over the skyline, Johann looked out his window at the glowing city below. His reflection in the glass was older now, weathered but content. On his desk sat two things: the folded napkin Maya had once found beneath his coffee cup, and the prototype of the tablet that had changed everything. He smiled, tapping a message onto the device. The speaker read it aloud softly, filling the empty room with words that sounded almost like a prayer. Sometimes the smallest act of respect can rewrite someone's destiny. And in a small apartment across town, Maya sat by her window, reading through hundreds of messages from deaf students thanking her for inspiring them. She closed her laptop and whispered, "It wasn't me. It was kindness." Because she had learned what the world so often forgets. Real power doesn't shout. It listens. So tell me, have you ever done something kind, only to realize later it changed everything? If this story touched your heart, hit that subscribe button and tell me where you're watching from. Because what comes next will remind you that when we choose compassion over cruelty, we don't just change lives, we change the world. They say a single moment of courage can echo through generations. For Maya Coleman, that moment had begun with a folded napkin in a diner. And now, 1 year later, it had become a legacy, written not in wealth, but in lives transformed. 12 months had passed since the world first heard her voice, a voice that spoke through hands, heart, and hope. And in that time, everything had changed. Adler Tech had grown stronger than ever, not through corporate power, but through purpose. The Project Echo platform had expanded to hundreds of schools, hospitals, and public spaces around the world. Deaf children were communicating with teachers for the first time. Parents were finally able to sign to their children without interpreters, and entire communities were reconnecting after years of silence. But the heart of it all was Hands of Hope Academy. It stood proudly in the heart of Brooklyn, a beautiful, sunlit building painted in soft shades of blue and white. On its front gate, the school's motto was carved in silver letters: "Silence can speak power." The opening ceremony drew people from across the world: educators, advocates, journalists, and parents who had once believed their children would never truly belong. But, for Maya, standing at the entrance that morning in her modest blazer and calm smile, none of it felt like fame. It felt like home. As the ribbon fluttered in the breeze, she remembered every hardship that had led her here: the ridicule, the layoffs, the tabloid lies, the tears in silence. All of it had become fertilizer for the garden of grace now blooming before her. The laughter of children filled the courtyard. Some ran, signing to each other with wild excitement. Others shyly held their parents' hands. They weren't afraid to express themselves anymore. Not here, not in this space built from love. Reporters surrounded Maya, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. "Miss Coleman," one asked, "how does it feel to have gone from a diner waitress to the founder of an international academy?" Maya smiled softly, signing as she spoke, "I never stopped being a waitress. I'm still serving. Only now, it's hope instead of coffee." The crowd chuckled warmly. Another reporter asked, "What inspired the name Hands of Hope?" She glanced toward the children, watching them sign, their faces alive with laughter. "Because our hands can do more than serve or fight," she said. "They can heal, they can teach, they can speak, and sometimes they can save lives." Just then, the sound of applause swept through the courtyard. Heads turned. At the edge of the crowd, stepping carefully out of a sleek car, was Johann Adler. The cameras shifted immediately toward him. For a moment, the flashes returned to the rhythm of a year ago. But this time, there was no scandal in the air. Only admiration. He walked slowly, his silver cane glinting in the sun, each step measured but sure. Time had softened him, yet his eyes still carried the same brilliance, that rare combination of strength and peace. Maya walked to meet him halfway. Without words, she signed, "You made it." He smiled, signing back. "I wouldn't have missed it for the world." When they reached the podium, the noise faded into silence. Even the children quieted, their eager eyes fixed on the man whose inventions had changed their lives. Johann turned to the audience, then to the children, and began to sign, his movements slow, graceful, and deliberate. The screen beside him translated his signs into spoken words. "When I lost my hearing, I thought I had lost my voice. The world stopped speaking to me, and I stopped believing it could hear me again. But then, one day, someone reminded me that voices don't only come through sound. They come through love, compassion, and courage." He turned to Maya. "This woman showed me that silence is not the absence of power. It is its highest form. It is patience. It is understanding. It is the space where true listening begins." The crowd was utterly still. He faced the children now, his hands trembling slightly, but his eyes shining with emotion. "Never hide your voice," he signed. "The world needs to see it." The translation appeared on the screen behind him, and the children erupted in applause. Not by clapping, but by raising both hands in the air and waving them rapidly, the sign language gesture for cheering. The sight of it made even the toughest journalists wipe their eyes. Maya stood beside him, overwhelmed by the beauty of the moment. She thought of her brother Malik, who had once dreamed of a school like this. She could almost see him there, in the faces of those laughing children, in the joy written across every parent's expression. After Johann finished, Maya stepped forward. Her voice was steady, her signing rhythmic and full of emotion. "One year ago, I was cleaning tables in a diner where people mocked me for being too kind. They thought I was naive for believing in decency, but now, looking at all of you, I realize something they never understood. Kindness isn't weakness. It's the foundation of everything strong." Her voice cracked slightly as she continued. "When I met Mr. Adler, I didn't see a billionaire. I saw a man who just needed someone to listen. And that's what this school is about. Listening. Listening with our hearts, our hands, our eyes. Because when we truly listen, we change what's possible." She paused, turning toward the children again. "You are not broken. You were never broken. The world just needed to learn your language." A parent in the front row wiped away tears. A teacher signed "thank you" from across the stage. The applause this time was thunderous, real, loud, and alive. But somehow, Maya felt that the quieter cheers, the hands waving joyfully in the air, spoke even louder. After the ceremony, the children flooded into their new classrooms, their laughter echoing down the hallways. Some of them tried on their new smart tablets that translated sign language into text. Others gathered around the murals painted along the walls, depicting hands reaching toward the sky. Johann and Maya walked through the halls together. Every child who passed by smiled or waved, some signing messages of gratitude. One small girl stopped in front of them. She was about 7, with curly hair and bright eyes that sparkled with confidence. She signed shyly, "Thank you for building my school." Maya knelt, smiling gently. "No," she signed back. "You built it. We just gave you the keys." The girl grinned and ran off, laughing with her friends. They reached the main hallway where a plaque had been mounted on the wall. It read, "Hands of Hope Academy, founded in partnership with Adler Tech Energy Systems, because every voice deserves to be heard." Johann reached out, tracing the letters with his fingertips. Then he signed quietly to Maya. "You did what I could not. You gave silence a future." She shook her head. "No," she signed. "You gave it meaning." They smiled at each other, a shared understanding passing between them, the kind that didn't need sound or translation. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low over the city, the schoolyard glowed in soft amber light. The children were still outside, playing, laughing, signing stories to each other. The air was full of joy, not the loud, chaotic kind, but something pure and calm. Maya stood at the window of her new office, watching them. She remembered every step of the journey, from the humiliation at the diner to the applause at the summit, from being fired to being celebrated. It all led to this: children laughing freely in a world that finally made space for them. Her phone buzzed softly. A message from Johann. 1 year ago, they mocked silence. Today, silence is teaching the world how to listen. She smiled. Her eyes welled up again, not with pain this time, but with gratitude. That night, as the school emptied and the last child waved goodbye, Maya walked down the hallway one last time. She stopped beneath the school's motto, "Silence can speak power," and placed her hand gently on the wall beneath it. She thought of her brother again, his laughter, his patience, his hands forming words that the world never tried to understand. And, for the first time, she whispered aloud, "They hear you now, Malik." Outside, the sky was painted with stars. A gentle breeze carried the distant sounds of the city, horns, chatter, music. But for Maya, all of it faded into one truth. The world was finally listening. Because of one act of respect, one moment of compassion, one person who refused to treat silence as emptiness. And maybe that's the secret to changing the world. Not by shouting louder, but by listening deeper. Because empathy, in its quietest form, speaks louder than any voice. So let me ask you this. In a world obsessed with noise, when was the last time you truly listened? If you believe kindness still changes lives, share this story and tap that subscribe button. Because together, we can make the world listen.